Why is the technology we use designed the way it is?
Gender gaps in technology solutions range from uncomfortable to life-threatening. Those failures are not accidental. They are the predictable outcomes of systems built without women. It's not just a moral imperative. It's not just inconvenient. It impacts our day-to-day lives.
Technology is not neutral. When tech fails to recognize your voice, your body, or your needs, it's not a glitch. It's a mirror reflecting who was never meant to be part of the system in the first place.
What values and assumptions shape that design?
Gender bias is forgetting about the women. In almost all research and technology design, there's this male default. Women have been left out.
What facts, details, and opinions inform the end product and our user experiences of the tech?
AI is definitely changing the world, but the problem with AI are, in some cases, very limited databases. And if data sets are limited in terms of they don't have enough information or numbers or are very much biased, then the result we will get by using AI will be biased as well.
Parts of the world may have made inroads in addressing discriminatory practices in workplaces and some social spaces. Can we say the same in relation to tech?
There's a lot of acknowledgement in gender bias as it relates to hiring practices and maybe even promotion. There has been far less acknowledgement of it in technology itself, in the products that we use, how women and even non-cisgender people are reflected, things like that.
Hello, I'm Rachel Shelley, and this is Women's World, Equity by Design, brought to you by City St George's, University of London, and the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, the UNFPA. Later, we will hear from Dr. Nagina Muntean, Chief of Innovation and Transformation for the United Nations Population Fund, and Lolita Taylor, Executive Producer of EDI Programme at CoStar National R&D Lab and former co-chair of BBC Women in STEM. In this episode, Disrupting Digital Development, we explore what happens when technology and artificial intelligence reflect back the biases that exist in our societies. Is it even recognised as a problem? And what is being done about it across universities, organisations, and innovation spaces? To understand what these biases are, how they arise, and how they impact the lives and experiences of women, we spoke to Professor Londa Schiebinger, the John L. Hines Professor of History of Science at Stanford University. She runs a global project helping scientists and engineers integrate sex, gender, and intersectional analysis into research so that they get technology and science correct.
We might go back to what causes gender bias in general, and that is that women were excluded from universities until about the 1920s, and women didn't really become professors until the 1960s and 70s. And that means that they weren't on the ground floor for scientific innovation, for research. They were always the outsiders. And there's a lot of research that shows that people tend to design for themselves. They tend to think of themselves as the subject of research. And so I think the men who were doing the research just had this default that, well, we're talking about humans. And they didn't understand that there are important sex differences and gender differences that are built into basic medical research and now built into AI. The specific problem with gender, race bias, all kinds of biases in AI is that the AI is trained on historical human data. We humans have had these biases for centuries. Obviously, the machine is going to reproduce that. So these biases are very deep, they're very historical, they're difficult to get rid of, but with understanding that there is gender bias, and I also call them intersectional biases. We can work to overcome them in AI, in medical research, in technology in general.
Londa is effectively saying that deep-seated bias is almost wired into technology due to the data sets being used. It hasn't been recognised as an issue because it's mainly men who have been conducting the research and development. To understand what this means in practice, she describes what happened when a graduate student at MIT was doing a PhD on facial recognition.
She realized that the technology she was developing could not see her face. The technology could not recognize a woman's face very well or a Black face very well. The error rate of facial recognition was 35% for darker-skinned women. So over a third. This is really unacceptable for technology. It doesn't work. Then if you move to darker-skinned men, the error rate was only about 12%. And for lighter-skinned women, it was 7%. And then for lighter-skinned men who had developed the technology, there was almost no error rate. It was at 1%.
It's clear that at a very fundamental level, there are problems with the technology. So what happens when we move into real-life applications? Marija Butkovic is the founder of Women of Wearables, which supports, connects, and inspires women in the wearable tech space. She says it's not easy being a woman in tech, and it's even harder to be a woman in wearable tech because of the male-dominated nature of the industry. She describes her own journey into this space.
Back in the days, in 2016, I was a founder of wearable tech startup. In those days, there were way more men than women, right? Like male founders, male innovators, regardless of the sector. And obviously that means that more funding went to male-founded businesses than female-founded businesses. Those were the early days of wearable technology. Most well-known wearable tech brands, so smartwatches and fitness trackers, were initially built and consisted of general features that would cater to everyone technically, but there weren't any features that would cater to women. That really caught my attention. What was even more striking for me is that when I had my son in 2018, I realized how technology sector that's building services that were provided to women as consumers, as patients as well, is very much biased. And I've experienced that when I went through pregnancy, when I gave birth. There's a lot of medical bias in the space. So that's why I'm really passionate about innovating in women's health, because it's changing the narrative.
Moving forward from research and anecdotal experiences, let's hear from big tech itself. T.B. Bardlavens is the Director of Product Equity at Adobe. His aim in this role is that every person, regardless of human difference, can access and harness the power of digital products without harm, bias, or limitation. What does that mean in practice?
At its core, we say, hey, how do we consider humans in our processes, whether it be product development or even just strategy and how we approach what communities we want to focus on or go after, right? And so one is like, are we actually building for and with community? Meaning that are we actually doing the work to not just extract from community, but really reciprocate and understand what are their needs and expectations of technology? How do they navigate technology? What are the challenges around it? Things of that nature. Many times, women particularly have a unique life experience that particularly even men don't have when it comes to navigating products. So if you're having to juggle children all the time, or even considering neurodivergence, so that like pregnancy itself is something that shifts how you think, how you navigate space and things like that. And so how do you make sure that products really take that type of shift into consideration? A lot of our work is really trying to be specific in how we center social identities. There's a lot of misrepresentation of cultures, particularly in the global South. And so we're going to start with understanding what the lives of women who are working in India look like. How does that differ from rural communities to urban communities? Many times in urban communities, it's much more of a competition to see who can produce the most, because that is really what you're trying to do, is to have the most output possible. Whereas in rural communities, this is where women actually build community, and this is where they have conversations and talk about life. And so working in these different areas actually have become more of a place of communion as opposed to a place of competition. And those are just like small things we learn.
Women across the world will have their own experiences of tech, which just doesn't reflect their lives, their bodies, the way they think. Examples of how technology can amplify discrimination are widespread. They include the gendering of AI tools reinforcing stereotypes based on pre-assigned gender roles, the fact that male voices tend to be preferred for tasks involving teaching and instruction, women's voices for submissive supporting roles. A screening resume program discriminated against women because it was informed by a data set in which women were unrepresented. A credit rating algorithm gave higher limits to men than women. TB considers why such problems persist, even though they are being addressed.
I think the biggest challenge we have as a tech industry, particularly, is that that is not a practice that is common, because that is antithetical to how we define innovation today. And most of us see innovation, particularly through tech, where we release all of these new products and we talk about all these new and great and cool things, but no one's actually used them. No one's actually leveraged these digital products in real world spaces, which means that the harm or the potential for harm that they can cause is not even understood until it's already out in the world causing harm. Inclusive and equitable design and product development is not only how do we build with community, but also how do we ensure that we really understand the potential harms of those products and then work for ways to mitigate those harms.
But also, as much as we are excited by these inventions as users, we should bear in mind that at the core of these designs are biases, unconscious or otherwise, that illustrate the tech is not impartial. Londa elaborates.
This is the great mythology of science and technology, that it's neutral. This is the core of my historical work. I go back to the 18th century to show how science that claimed to be value-free or neutral or objective really embedded cultural values. I think it's a goal for technology to be value neutral, to be objective, but as long as society is biased, the technology is going to reflect those biases and, in fact, reinforce those biases. So it's a great mythology that science is neutral or that tech could be neutral. So that's why we have the UN Equity Alliance to work toward making technology work for everyone.
Despite the problematic nature of the tech, there is progress. If not necessarily neutral, it is attempting to balance the scale. Marija notes this in her line of work.
Traditional wearables are now really capturing the female audience, and I think they've gone past pink it and shrink it movement. In terms of different devices, we've seen in our community a lot of interesting innovations around reproductive health, disrupting current categories of products that haven't been disrupted for many years. One example are tampons. There's a whole range now of innovative tampons and pads that can be used even as a medical device or 100% sustainable, dissolvable in the water. A lot of small startups are now innovating in that space. Few of them are innovating in terms of speculums, so devices that are used for gynecological appointments. And now we are finally realizing that women don't have to suffer if they're not comfortable. And then I think we see a great movement in the drug and biotech space.
What if you don't just take the data sets and results? Instead, you actively program to generate results that reflect a more equitable, diverse society than the data might provide on its own. In this respect, TB believes that there is a lot of good work going on.
We're seeing a lot of really positive outcomes from AI and generative technologies, where there's much more focus on ensuring there's accurate representation of people and that there's a reduction of harm or reduction of stereotypes. I think the really important piece is, how do we get to consistency and how do we get to coherence? I think sometimes the challenge is getting people to understand that you can have both equitable products that are also revenue generators. Some of the big strides we're trying to make now is if we can get business to see that you can drive even greater revenue, you can drive deeper market penetration, you can drive broader scale, you can drive greater innovation by working in these ways. And it will all relate to building the business even more strongly. Once we can get to that place of coherence, then I think that's where we really will start to see some massive changes across the industry. And so I think our successes have been in a few bright spots across some key areas. And the question really is, how do we make it so that those successes really start to become reflected as like these are just the common ways that we work?
For Marija, it's about people. How can women be empowered within the tech space and persuaded to pursue careers in tech?
I think the simple answer will be funding. Whenever I talk about this with, women in the space, with investors in the space, with innovators in the space, the answer is always we need more funding. So whether it's funding startups, whether it's giving women bigger budgets to innovate within big companies, whatever we want to call it, it's always about the money, right? Because we cannot deny the fact that only around 2-3% of venture capital funding in the startup world goes to women-founded businesses. Everything else goes to male-founded businesses. That's one thing. Secondly, I don't think that women need any more mentorship or support or advisors or whatever you want to call it than men. I think we need to be given equal opportunities. And that means that, we need to be listened at as an equal participant without bias.
We've seen there are clear problems with gender bias in AI and tech. We have heard how they arise and also some individual instances of how they are being addressed. What does the future hold? Londa wants to see companies move away from retrofitting for women. Instead, they need to incorporate gender and intersectional analysis from the very beginning.
We need to embed this kind of training in our basic science curricula for science and engineering. And this is something that we can fix and that people are trying to fix now. For computer science, there's a lot of embedded ethics, and people are trying to incorporate social analysis into the basic technical courses so that students or future coders will think as they're coding for a new product, what might be the social impact of this, and maybe they can fix something from the beginning. Understanding how to do social analysis, whether it's sex analysis, gender analysis, racial analysis, intersectional analysis, is a skill. A lot of people think you need the women on the team to do that, but this type of analysis is not attached to the XX chromosome. Everybody can learn it, and it's a skill, and it needs to be learned.
TB agrees and looks forward to a future where gender norms are less prevalent in society.
We do see a lot of success. We see more degree programs around inclusive design, and we're starting to see much more considerations of humanness in HCI or human computer interaction degrees, programs, and things of that nature. And so it's starting to happen more, but I think that we really need to find ways to accelerate and scale it. One interesting future will be when we personally think about some of these quote unquote gender dominant professions and we stop seeing a gender at all. We start thinking like, oh, this person. If we start saying, hey, when we think about a lawyer, if you always think about a man and you think about lawyer, what if after a while you start thinking about a woman, or maybe you just start thinking about a person like, oh, this person is a lawyer. Are they a man or a woman? And so I think that'd be really interesting, is to be able to talk about professions and things that really have some kind of gender dominance, whether it's parental leave or anything else, and be able to actually talk about it through a more gender neutral perspective. I think what people expect to see in AI, both today and hopefully even more in the future, is less of these gender norms happening. Something that's interesting for the future is like being able to see the broadness of human identity as opposed to seeing a very generic binary decision of is it a man or a woman, but is it a human who is able to fully express themselves in whatever mask or femme way that is appropriate for them and that really fits whatever needs that they have as an individual, and that we reflect those things through the lens of whatever technologies that we're using to reflect those people.
As the global community steadily works to this future, both Londa and TB believe that our journey should be defined by collaboration and awareness among industry stakeholders and a broader social understanding of what is happening in the industry.
Well, this is why I think the UN Equity Alliance is so great, because they're really talking to a lot of the tech people and talking to them about equity. So I think that AI developers have two main ethical goals. One is to create social equity, and the second is to create environmental sustainability. Companies involved in AI have to really see what the social impact is of their programs and see if they can mitigate that.
I'll say that probably the biggest thing is to really help people understand that this work, and by extension, the discipline of product equity through the lens of technology, is still emerging. It's only a few years old. It's less than half a decade old. And so the work that we're doing every day is to create an industry that hasn't really existed. And in doing so, also creating a thought process in business that hasn't existed. And so how we're approaching it and how we're doing things is really on a case by case, moment by moment basis, and we're experimenting and innovating as we go. But our hope is that as we have greater success, as we show that there is profitability with equity, and both of those things can be possible, then hopefully we'll see more pervasiveness of the approach across other businesses.
To discuss the issues raised, here are Dr. Nagina Muntian, Chief of Innovation and Transformation for the United Nations Population Fund, and Lolita Taylor, Executive Producer of EDI Programs at CoStar National R&D Lab, and former co-chair of BBC Women in STEM.
What we're hearing is a representation crisis. And I'm rather shocked to hear about the 35% error rate in facial recognition for dark-skinned women. And it isn't just bad data. It actually reflects who is writing the code, who gets funded, and who's being heard. Marija Butkovic's story shows this clearly. When her needs during pregnancy were ignored, women's pain was actually being excluded from the product cycle entirely.
It's amazing, and that's why the equity by design principle matters. We fund women-led innovation, support inclusive design, and ask the right questions, like how tech impacts rural women, adolescent girls, or pregnant mothers wherever they are. Equity must be built in from the first line of the code.
And what does that actually mean? It means shifting the narrative around innovation itself. TB Bardlavens said it best. Real innovation doesn't just launch a flashy product. It listens. It co-creates. It's actually seeing community as something to build with, not extract from. Inclusive tech is not charity, it's clarity. It's good design. And it's better outcomes for actually everyone.
Exactly. And that's why we are focusing on changing systems, not just fixing symptoms. We advocate for curricular reform so that every coder learns how to address gender equity from the studies. We support inclusion at all levels. And we believe each tech leader must be accountable to consider gender equity as a non-negotiable foundation.
What gives me hope is the rising generation asking, why not? Why not gear that fits our bodies? Why not funding that backs our ideas? Why not assume women are the default, not the exception? These are the questions that rewire systems, and they challenge design from the inside out.
That gives me hope too, and I believe when we look back in 5 years and see real transformation, we can achieve it if we continue to support those voices, fund their work, and build platforms for inclusive innovation. UNFPA's role is to catalyze, to amplify, to connect, but the responsibility is shared. It's a collective impact.
It's clear that technology development has come a long way from a very singular perspective that failed women and marginalised communities. A diversity of voices is shaping developments that align with the needs of individuals, whoever and wherever they are. I'm Rachel Shelley, and you've been listening to Women's World, Equity by Design. It was produced by Jackie Imas and Malusi Ngala of City St George's University of London. Thank you for joining us.